So the big news in corporate governance is that cyber security, cyber protection is becoming an expected best practice. If you're on the board of a company, if you're a manager of a company, if you own a small company, and you don't have some type of cyber defense policy or procedures in place, there's a lot of downside risk that you have. Not only the risk that your company could have losses, but also risk of liability and even negligence as a board member. One of the things that's starting to materialize is best practices for companies. And in this Hacker News, they're talking about what are the cyber insurance requirements? Can your organization comply? In order to get cyber liability insurance, you have to comply with certain regulations. You have to make sure that all your logins are secured, all your devices are secured, all your users are vetted. Even if you don't buy cyber liability insurance, if you don't put these best practices in place, you could have other losses beyond just getting hacked and having your computer system destroyed or your data being exfiltrated. The first thing that's going to happen is if there's any kind of litigation is you're going to be asked, did you follow these best practices? Were you aware that this is what most companies do? And if the answer is no, you may have liability outside of your company. Maybe your vendors, your customers, other government agencies can have claims against your company. Remember, we're not attorneys, we're not giving you legal advice, but this is something you may want to check into. As an example of some of these compliance issues is, how can you protect privileged users if you don't know who they are? So for example, if you have people that are allowed to log into your system, access your records, maybe even connect to different third-party platforms, if you don't know everybody that is able to log into your system or have credentials, you can't protect from those uses being used improperly. For example, you may have an old login that's bouncing around that more than one people are using. Maybe you have an expired login that allows more access than it's supposed to. You may have former employees that still have logins. Sometimes you even have logins for social media that more than one person is using to post updates, but that may connect back to your company. What about service accounts? This is an even bigger problem. These are platforms that aren't your core programming code, but do things such as automation. They're accounts that perform tasks in environment, from scanning machines and installing software updates to automating repetitive tasks. To qualify for a policy, meaning insurance, organizations need to be able to document all service account activities, including source and destination machines. What that means is source and destination. A source machine is where this activity originates from. Destination is where it lands, where it controls. So if you have, let's say, a Bluetooth device, that's your source device. If it controls a thermostat or controls a server, that's your destination device. And you need to know all of those in your organization. And it's not hard to find. You can actually do a census and do a ping of all the devices on your network to find out where your vulnerabilities might lie. The biggest reason that these are important is because they're such small devices and often overlooked, they are often targeted by threat actors due to their highly privileged access, according to underwriters. So even though those devices might seem small and insignificant, you want to lock them down more than your server, because that's where the hackers get in. And first you have to identify them all. And remember, even if you don't buy cyber liability insurance, you want to do these best practices, because look, without insurance, it's more important to prevent a hack than even with insurance, because you're bare, you're not covered. And you can use the same techniques, it's just that you want to make sure you put them into play. How important is it for companies? Well, the government and industry groups all say that cyber insurance is now a must-have. It's not an option, it's a must-have. Now, obviously, from a self-serving standpoint of selling cyber insurance, that sounds like a good thing, but it's almost where without cyber insurance, you're almost putting your company and employees at risk, because if a hack comes in and shuts you down, even for a week or a week and a half, now you're not going to have your revenue, you're going to have no access to your accounts receivable, where that's your lifeblood, that's your cash flow. And hackers a lot of times will send out messages to your payables, to people that have payables with you, and have them divert their money somewhere else. So now you might have, let's say, a month's worth of payables, that are paid out by your customers that go to some other hacker, that go to some other recipient, now you're not going to get your money back because you can't go to your customer and say, send the money again. They already paid their bill. It was your fault that it got hacked. So that's going to be a big problem in your cash flow and even your customer relations. And private companies aren't the only ones at risk. We're seeing a lot more with public sector and semi-public sector institutions such as colleges, government agencies, other types of districts, public utility districts, and ransomware is hitting them hard where they get locked up, they get all their customer files, they threaten to release them, or they use them nefariously for identity theft. You know, if you have a database of all your customers with their name, address, maybe social security number, copy of ID, they can now use that for identity theft. And look, if your customers have their identity stolen because of your hack, you may have some liability civilly and also under law. There may be a law in your state or at the federal level that puts you at risk for losing that. And if you didn't follow those best practices, going back to what the requirements are for compliance, you may have extra liability because you didn't even do the bare minimum. So make sure that you're getting good advice from your legal department, from your tech department, from your insurance and risk coverage to make sure you're not putting yourself, your customers, or your vendors at more risk than is necessary.